Every directing job is different. But what does the process of both directing and DPing a series of ads for Amazon look like? And how much does someone get paid to shoot ads that look like this? This video is sponsored by Audiio, the affordable online music and sound effect licensing platform that is underscoring my voice right now. More on them later. For me, since the pandemic, I increasingly get approached about jobs where they want me to DP as well as direct. Normally they're semi-decent budgeted sized jobs, at least in my ballpark, with budgets anywhere from 10k to 100k and everywhere in between. But they're not the big boy budgets, so me DPing is normally a compromise to make room for something else somewhere in the budget. This series of online-only ads for Amazon was one of those jobs. Another director recommended me, someone who was a friend of someone who worked at the agency, who I don't personally know but am aware of online. They'd suggested my name when they'd seen the brief, so thank you to that man. The agency had taken a look at my work online and then reached out to me over the phone. The producer initially told me a bit about the project, the dates I'd need to be available. I was available, but it was right slap bang in the middle of 3 other shooting days, so it would be a hectic week, but I felt like I could handle it. She asked me my asking day rate as a director and if I'd consider DPing as well. I was a little surprised when the producer told me what agency they were calling from, because I used to work with that agency a lot about 8 or 9 years ago. However, I didn't know anyone that still currently worked there. So again, thank you to that director for rekindling this relationship. They sent me the briefing deck, and then 24 hours later, I had a call with creatives to go through everything. Everything seemed straightforward enough. As I began the video by saying,
every directing job is different.
But this one was even more out of the ordinary, as the agency were also producing it, and at the time of bringing me on, had already made a lot of the big decisions that a director would typically be involved with. They were sorting props themselves, and they'd already sent out both casting and location briefs. I asked if I could take a look at the options that they'd had back, and after looking through a bunch of them, I immediately fed back with my location preferences, even though they'd already shared their own preferences with me and they weren't necessarily aligned, but I was thinking with my DP hat on as much as anything else. I got an email back explaining that both the client and agency were happy with their previous location preferences and they were actually planning on confirming them. Now, just over a week out before shooting, it was a bit late in the day to be considering others, they thought. This all happened last thing on a Friday, and I then deliberated on it over the weekend. On the one hand, I was getting the full fee that I'd asked for, and I could just look at this as another job. But on the other, they'd hired me for a reason, and I was keen to try and make this the best that I could do. They referenced my should have got a takeaway spec, offered my site to me on the calls, as well as several other ads that, in terms of dressing and locations, were all bright, poppy, full of colour and character, and none of the locations they'd shortlisted were really ticking the boxes on any of these things. With just the one person working in art department and a minimal selection of props, we really needed the locations to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. On the Tuesday morning after a bank holiday weekend, after some consulting from BFF Tom Brown on how I should approach this dilemma, calmly, aggressively, or just not at all, I wrote a polite email reiterating my preferred options, as well as my understanding that we were close to the shoot, but saying I could make time to recce them ASAP so we can confirm them, and asking nicely if we could chase up on their availabilities. By the end of the day, I was told that everyone now agreed. I headed out and recce'd both their initial location options and mine to reiterate again why I thought they'd be better. One of mine I didn't actually have to visit though, because I'd shot there a few weeks previously on another shoot, so I already knew everything I needed to know, and mostly it was that it had a lot more colour and interest than this place, their previous choice. Anyone that knows anything about cinematography is well aware that white walls are the enemy, 95% of the time. My favourite cafe option was actually a pub, and the agency and client were worried it would look too much like a bar and not enough like a coffee shop. But I assured them with a bit of dressing we could make it pass for a coffee shop, and that this place had much more character to work with, as well as a bunch of lovely inbuilt practical lights that I was a fan of. I do love me a practical. When told they weren't convinced, I held my hands up in surrender. I never want to be seen as difficult in these situations. I'd shared my thoughts twice and was happy enough to go with their second choice location, even though it wasn't particularly large or varied and maybe difficult to light, but at least it had character. However, by the end of play the next day, I got an update that they'd talked about it and everyone now agreed, and I was going to get both the locations I wanted to shoot in. Yay! I could tell that the producer was spinning a million and one things, so didn't hassle her too much. But I did chase up again on casting options. But it wasn't until gone 5 p.m, just one working day before the actual shoot day, that I was shared anything, and they'd already made a bunch of selects. I gave their selections a look through, and although there weren't any height details, which would have been something I would have been paying attention to here to make sure we didn't have any comically bizarre on-camera pairings, I didn't see any glaring issues, so said all good, as it felt this late in the game that it was really just a courtesy to have it run past me at all. And I'm sure everyone could do without any more headaches with so little time remaining for prep. As the director, I'd recommended first AD options, none of which were available. I'd also recommended several art director options too. Again, none of which were available. I consulted other directors for their thoughts on first ADs when given a list of people who were available, and trusted the producer at the agency when they said they had some good leads for art directors and would confirm them ASAP. Outside of this, my only other real responsibilities fell in the realm of cinematography as the DP. I tried all my preferred gaffers, and because of a scheduling conflict, ended up having to split the crew over the 2 days, taking a risk on the second with Declan, who is usually playing the role of Spark. But Will, one of my other favourite gaffers who wasn't available, had been encouraging that I give Declan a chance. I also had to sort out kit, both for camera department and make the lighting budget work, rather than doing the normal song and dance with the producer of, what do you need? Off to the rental house they go. We can't afford that, you need to lose a bunch of stuff. I explained that it would be much easier for me if they just told me the full camera and lighting budget, and I would make it all work within that to the best of my ability. As a lot of the kit was going to be coming from the gaffer on the first day, First AC James Wicks, and myself, as well as 2 different rental companies. I'm never one for trying to force my own kit onto jobs, but seeing as they'd referenced my spec spot, I figured that we'd just shoot it on the same kit that I'd shot that with, which was my red v-raptor and cheapest chips full-frame micas, which could really do with a service, as the focus ring is a bit dodgy on the 50mm, and semi-regular First AC James Wicks will be quick to let you know that the focal distances don't always necessarily correspond with the markings on the lens itself. But I'm always like, does it actually matter? Look at the monitor. Is it in focus? Cool. Move on. But yeah, they are cheap, and with that comes some quirks. I actually recently got them fixed, so now no quirks. I can be a self-destroying idiot with the amount of discount and free usage of my kit that I allow on jobs often, but I was adamant with this job that I was going to be charging for everything that was going to be on it. Amazon's definitely got the cash to pay rates, but there's always still a set budget that production have to work with, and I needed to work within that budget. At least by owning certain items though, I can give discount on the rental rates to make the budget work. After a small amount of back and forth with rental companies, Gaffer Al with his kit and First AC James with his kit, I managed to make it work in a way that meant we might not all be getting the toppest of dollar for our kit. FYI, I don't think I've ever actually rented out my kit at 100% list price, and it's very uncommon to pay 100% of the rental price when renting from actual rental companies. But everyone was going to get paid fairly, respective of what they were supplying on the job. And I could just about squeeze enough budget to allow for some much needed extra sparks that lighting so desperately needed, as the original budget hadn't allowed for more than one. I'd also managed to get a decent Steadicam op booked for the first day, but we weren't going to be able to afford him for both. So as the second day was going to be more achievable on my poor man's Wally Dolly, aside from one slightly tricky shot, I managed to confirm the Steady for day one where it was absolutely necessary. Despite its great look, there were 2 negatives with our location on the first day. Firstly, it was within the congestion charge here in London, so immediately everyone who had to drive or deliver kit now cost production £15 more per vehicle. Not a lot in the scheme of things, but it adds up. And secondly, there was no parking either on site, and even the nearby parking options had limited hours. I'd spoken with producer Emily about this ahead of time though, saying we absolutely needed lighting nearby location, and ideally camera too, because we'd be wasting a lot of time going back and forth, moving the vehicles. It just wasn't going to be practical. So we agreed that everyone would park as close as they possibly could, and we would all add the parking tickets we'd inevitably get to our invoices, adding another £60 as long as paid within 7 days to everyone who had to drive's invoices. Living and working in a city like London has a lot of perks, but it also has a lot of pain in the arses to work around too. We started to load in, and I talked the various heads of departments through what we needed to do, meeting and speaking to our props master / art director for the first time. An unusual circumstance, but at least we had someone. He'd only been confirmed over the weekend, he told me, so had very little idea of what we were actually doing and what he had to work with. But all things considered, I think he ended up doing a stellar job. On the production crew, there was a producer who, as I mentioned, was also from the agency, director DOP, first AD, Steadicam operator, first AC, second AC, / behind the scenes legend / mentee / the Schreimeister, gaffer, 2 sparks on day 1 and 3 sparks on day 2, art director, location manager, hair and makeup artist, hair and makeup artist's assistant, stylist, stylist assistant, a DIT who was also from the agency and would be editing the whole project, and lastly, a runner. There were 8 featured cast and extras. I also got the producer to sit in with her back to us for a few takes, with 5 additional agency and 3 clients. Now, every crew member matters, of course. I was chuffed with the results on the first day thanks to everyone that was involved. But the star of the show was undoubtedly Will Light, the Steadicam operator. It was the first time that I'd worked with Will and was massively impressed. I talked him through the moves, asking what was achievable tentatively, but the man was like a robot. I kept pushing the tables in a little bit more, a little bit tighter for more parallax, but he still nailed it, and he insisted he worked better without a spotter, so he did this all only knocking over 1 glass of water the whole day. As our art department was a crew of 1, I'd made myself very available to him to help wherever I could. I placed the cast members 1 by 1, giving them their action and making tweaks with placements after any feedback from agency and the client. The usual 20/20 struggle of making things work for both 16:9 and 9:16 ratios simultaneously were there, but that's nothing we're not all used to at this point. We then essentially shot a bunch of variations on a similar setup for the rest of the day, changing our actions, styling and props for different markets and items they wanted to push. It honestly went really well. I was super happy, and we even wrapped 2 hours early. The second day we lost Will, our steady, in place of my old cheap and reliable Wally Dolly and a gimbal. We also swapped Gaffer Al for Spark, stepping up to Gaffer Declan. And this excited me greatly. But one of our sparks was none other than Hassan Bloody Menk.
Hassan's here, everyone.
Who I had no idea was going to be there. And other than the fact I haven't seen him in years, this got me hyped because Hassan and I used to live together. The man's helped me build IKEA furniture. He's gripped for me, gaffed for me, and was even at my 30th birthday party. The son I've never had. And now look at him. Look at that beard. That's my boy. I'd been upfront about my lack of skill when operating the Ronin 2, and that we would need to allow more time in the schedule for James and myself to get reacquainted with the operation and ideal settings of this bulky, prehistoric beast of a gimbal, as it had been nearly 2 years since I'd last had to operate one. But we just couldn't afford steady, and none of the decent gimbal ops that I know were available. So this was the best of a bad situation. Fortunately for me, I was going to be shooting this all full frame on a 24mm lens. So quite wide, which can be forgiving in helping to hide some of the imperfections in my operating. After a lot of sweat, we eventually got the nowhere near 100% perfect, but close enough take. Unfortunately, I'm guessing due to some feedback somewhere along the line in post-production, they didn't use the close enough take. Instead, they used this one. It looks like no one thought to stabilize the footage in post, and despite it being nowhere near overexposed on the day, it's been graded to look like we didn't know how to light. Details like these is why I like to be involved after the shoot too. All of the shots after this were close-ups on individuals, so that was going to make both lighting and dressing the scenes much easier. This is how we lit the first one. We had an Aperture 1200D through a large 150 dome softbox with full diffusion, grid and a layer of CTO gel over it to warm everything up. We've negged the far light coloured wall to reduce bounce on the fill side using a couple of 4x4 floppies, but then brought some of it back with an Aperture 300D, again with CTO gel over it bouncing into the corner of the room to give us some of what you see here. An Amaran F22X is acting as a hair light, separating her from the background on the shadow side, and as you can see, there's a shed load of practical fairy lights I never got back after the shoot, twinkling away here in the background. The Aperture Storm ATC didn't exist yet on this shoot, so there's a Nanlite Forza 60B with a little spotlight attachment on it picking out this bit of the mantelpiece so it didn't fall into total darkness. And lastly, not that you can see too much of it because of the speed of this clip, but there's a teeny weeny Aperture MT Pro down here in the fireplace showing off its fire effects setting, which both the client and agency were impressed with. We then redressed this same space twice over for the following 2 talent-based shots. My favourite being this closet shot. The bedroom shooting options weren't great. And as you know, we didn't have a lot of art department resources. So as all of these expressions are quite fun and not too real in performance, I'd suggested we use all of the clothes that we had in styling to create an all-consuming closet. As there'd been so little/no prep time for art, we didn't even have the railings we needed. So borrowed from the stylists and then used a couple of C-stands to create the railings in the foreground. I really like the results. On APA jobs, you typically get 1 hour for lunch, unless production want to pay penalties. And I thought it was worth mentioning that on this second shoot day, that I spent 45 minutes of my hour sat in a quiet room in the house doing a pre-production meeting for another job. Juggling jobs can be tricky as a freelancer, but the agency and client for the shoot the following day were helpful in being flexible for the PPM time so I could still attend. After we'd wrapped with the talent, we were falling a little behind in the schedule, so tried to pick up a selection of Amazon Box product shots in a few different locations that wouldn't necessarily feel too English, as these were all for use in multiple markets, which is and was tricky to do when shooting in an English home in England and with no art department prep time. But we shot some shots. Whether they look country agnostic enough, I'll let you be the judge of that. But I'd say probably not. On this very last shot of the day, I was pushing the first AD to be on top of the client and agency as we were running late. And although I'd briefed the producer about overtime charges from the crew, a bit of context here, I'd been told that she hadn't produced any shoots of this nature before. It wasn't necessarily that I was trying to be a condescending But if I'm being fully honest, I was selfishly mostly thinking about myself, still having 2 consecutive shoot days left and knowing there was still a long way to go before I could sleep that night. That was my main motivation for wrapping on time. I remember playing around with this dingle for a while to try and make the light a little interesting in this awkward shooting setup. But the client didn't like how it distorted the box. I think we're all guilty though, and clients in particular, as they're taking into consideration so many stakeholders when they're on set, of overthinking these things. No dingle was just boring. I know it's all subjective, but it definitely looked better with the broken up light. So even though I was ready for the day to be over so I can get to bed, I said, let's roll on both options so the agency could at least try and push the better one in the edit. I'll reiterate one final time.
Every directing job is different.
And on this one, it really felt like they didn't want any of my input at all after wrap. As the agency is normally more of a social agency, I was prodding to suggest colorists chasing to see edits, but there were already several rounds of sharing and feedback down the line before I was even shown anything. So taking this as they didn't want them, I kept my opinions and thoughts to myself, even though I saw plenty of room for improvement across all of the edits. On the one hand, it's all subjective though, so what do I know? But on the other, I had been hired to direct and EP it. So typically as a director, I'd have input at this stage. But everyone was happy. So as long as I managed to get some kind of shots for the reel and get paid, so was I. But if I had been given the opportunity to give some notes, you better believe that I would have been commenting on the music and sound design. And I would have absolutely been pointing the agency in the direction of Audiio, the sponsor of today's video. Audiio is a music licensing platform that offers an ever-expanding library of music and sound effects for use in your projects. On the lower tiers, they offer licensing subscriptions that can cover usage for you and your clients with businesses of up to 100 employees. But if you're like me, working with major brands, they also offer bespoke subscriptions that cover larger corporations, as well as one-off purchases for TV, commercials, and theatrical releases. What I love about Audiio is how you can navigate it. Take this breakdown episode, for example. I used Audio's Hands AI tool to find a tension-building track that crescendos in anticipation before a moment of relief. It gave me a bunch of options that absolutely nailed the brief, but I actually ended up picking something slightly different to what I'd imagined in my head in the first place. If you follow the link at the top of the description and use code PETERS70 at checkout, you'll get 70% off your first year of Audiio Pro. Thank you, Audiio, for sponsoring this video. I got £5,000 per shoot day as my directing and DPing fee for this. £10,000 for essentially 3.5 to 4 days worth of my time is a pretty good return if you ask me. So I was happy. Plus, on top of that, I had my camera, lenses, monitors, as well as various other accessories on both days, and all of my lighting on the second day. Even though this was all at reduced rates, that was still a healthy
£2,500 on top of my fee.
I think that's about all I have to share with you on this job. No treatment, no pre-production meeting. Very little work for a great amount of reward for a change.
What do you think though? Would you have handled any of this differently?
Do let me know your thoughts in the comments, even the mean ones. YouTube thinks you'd enjoy this video next, and I think that you should absolutely subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.